Hey everyone, it's Erica Stapleton with the 12 News I-Team, and I want to talk about our series Locked Inside, exposing dark and deadly secrets at a group home in the East Valley. Our series first came out in 2022, but a lot's happened since then, and now we have a new ending. But before we get to that, here's our original reporting.
April 12th, 2021, 5 hours, 29 minutes, 11 seconds.
Sir, we have a bad connection. Where are you at? 3583 East Wild Horse?
Yes. One of our clients just attacked the staff.
Okay, what's going on there?
This man calling 911 is frantic.
Okay, what? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding you. What did he do?
So frantic that at first it's hard to hear what's going on.
I said one of our clients just attacked us.
Okay.
It's a group home.
It's an employee at a group home calling for help after he said one of the residents was trying to attack him and his coworker.
Hello?
Okay, does anybody need medical attention?
They ran outside the house, that resident still inside, when the operator sent a squad car.
Okay, yes, we have officers on the way right now. Does anybody need medical? Do you need the paramedics to come out and check on you?
No, not yet. We're outside running. Just the police.
You just need the police? Okay.
But once those officers got there, they'd realize how wrong that employee was. That this call for help was far worse than anyone could have imagined, and that the suspect had a big secret.
Definitely didn't think that I was living next to a murderer.
It's terrifying. We have kids all up and down this street.
They should be shutting that home down, in my opinion.
This is Locked Inside, a closer look at a tragedy that should have been prevented.
I hated it.
We don't know who's there, why they're there.
Exposing gaps in a system that should protect the state's most vulnerable people and secure the state's most violent offenders. But what happens if they're one and the same?
I think this is a system that let both of them down.
Silence and a lack of transparency only tell me that maybe there's more to the story that we don't know.
The thing that I always remember is his smile.
Nicole Williams can easily remember her first love.
Infectious, and not just his mouth. I mean, his whole face and eyes would light up.
Stephen Howls. She met him on a bus in Hawaii in 1993 and married him 5 months later.
We were young, and so there was always financial struggle, especially in Hawaii where it's so expensive to live.
She said Stephen was a music man, playing his saxophone, trying his hand at sound engineering, with big dreams on the horizon.
You know, he never had the goal of being the front man leading the act, but he loved being behind the scenes and doing the music mixing and recording and helping from the back end, being able to put music out.
But about a year into their marriage, Nicole started noticing a shift.
At first it was small things. And he would make little comments that were just a little off. They started progressing more. We had a park that we would walk by, and he started talking to me about a frog he met there and the conversations he was having with this frog. But it took me a little bit to realize that it wasn't just him talking. He was hearing the frog talk to him.
Signs of delusions were starting to show.
That was one of the first ones that really stood out. And it started affecting his work.
She saw him get worse over time. Trying to get by day was a challenge, and help was hard to come by.
And watching him struggle with medications and start getting a little better, and then those wouldn't work, and kind of the yo-yoing up and down.
The yo-yoing became too much for both of them. They divorced in 1994.
Was his mental health one of the reasons that led to the split?
That was the reason for the split.
Stephen eventually moved to Arizona, where he had family. Nicole said he'd try staying in places like group homes with supported living.
He always had the greatest sense of humor on it, too. I have one card that said, from all of us, you know, we miss you, and had like a little apartment building. and he added in my head, and so he did have a humor about it.
He eventually stopped the connection, and Nicole lost track of Stephen, but she always tried to figure out where he was, even searching shelters in their home state.
I would check the Social Security Death Index once a year to see if he showed up. I would walk through a lot of the homeless shelters, making sure he's okay. That was the main thing. We wanted to know he was okay.
She later learned he wouldn't be okay.
You guys the one that called?
Around 5:30 in the morning on April 12, 2021, Gilbert police responded to that frantic 911 call at a Tilda Manor group home on Wild Horse Drive that's supposed to provide 24/7 supervision to its residents.
Okay. And how did he attack you?
Like they told the 911 operator, these employees tried to explain that a resident inside the home tried to hurt them, and they ran outside.
All right, so we'll go and talk to him real quick.
But when officers tried to go find that resident,
you guys have a key? It's locked.
the door was locked, and neither employee had a key.
So you guys are the staff? Yeah. Okay, so how are you guys going to get in the house when we leave?
Then, 6 minutes after the officers arrived,
so you guys left the house without any keys?
Everything changed.
Also, there's a man inside bleeding from his head.
They saw a man lying in a pool of blood on a bedroom floor, and they rushed to get inside. They eventually made it in,
We've made entry.
and the footage goes dark.
Heart check for pulse.
They render what sound like chest compressions and called for backup to come in and help this man.
Do you have a pulse?
No.
Soon after, they find another man in the shower, and the footage comes back on, still blurry due to police redaction.
What's your name, sir? Chris. Chris? Okay. Is that short for Christopher? Yeah.
Christopher Lambeth, the man who reportedly tried to attack the staff members. Police suspect he might have hurt the other man too, and took him into custody.
One detained.
By the time backup got to the man lying in blood on the floor, it was too late.
And just so you know, you do have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law.
The chest compressions didn't work.
All right, boss, go and have a seat.
49-year-old Stephen Howls was declared dead at 5:46 a.m.
That should have never happened. I worried about things like that happening, but I worried about it on the street, not in someplace that's supposed to keep them safe.
The Gilbert police report details that Christopher Lambeth allegedly tried to attack the two employees around 5 a.m. They ran outside, and he ultimately locked them out of the house. Lambeth admitted on the scene that he was the one who killed Stephen Howls.
Mr. Lambeth, you're here on a new Superior Court case for one count of murder in the second degree, a Class 1 felony.
Christopher Lambeth was booked into county jail and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Stephen Howls.
Sir, you have a bond in the amount of $2 million. That is a secured bond, so you can use a bonding agency to assist you.
This was not how his day was supposed to go, sitting in a jail cell charged with murder.
Thank you, sir.
April 12th should have been moving day for Christopher Lambeth. He was scheduled to move out of Tilda Manor to a lower level of care at 11 a.m. the morning of the killing. But as it turns out, April 12th stands out for another reason.
It was a tragic thing that had to happen to them.
Are they alive or dead right now?
They're dead.
Exactly 16 years before the killing at the Tilda Manor group home, on April 12, 2005, Christopher Lambeth found himself in a different jail.
Okay, how do you know they're dead?
I killed them.
Accused of a different brutal murder. The Pima County Sheriff's Department burned the original tapes from this interview, so this is a reenactment based on a transcript.
You killed him?
Yeah.
This was 20-year-old Christopher Lambeth talking with detectives. They brought him in for questioning after finding longtime couple Carl and Patricia Gremler brutally stabbed to death inside their home in Rejito, a small community outside of Tucson.
They were real good people. They helped the whole community.
Juanita Carbajal, born and raised in Rejito, lived next door to the Gremlers and remembers the grisly scene from 2005.
Just like family. We grew up as family. It was a tragic thing that had to happen to them.
Back then, a family friend got a bad feeling when the Gremlers didn't show up for church. and called the sheriff's office to check on them on April 12, 2005. When deputies first stepped into the Gremlers' home, they found a mess and braced themselves as they walked further inside, ultimately finding Christopher Lambeth in a bed, watching TV. Across the hall, they found Carl and Patricia's bloody bodies.
It was like a scary story.
But Christopher Lambeth wasn't an intruder in their home. Christopher Lambeth was Carl and Patricia Gremler's grandson.
You can tell me, man, you know, are you glad they're gone?
Yeah. I'm happy that they're dead now.
Why is that?
It really is a lot of personal problems, and I'm just glad it's over with them.
Court records show Lambeth was diagnosed with bipolar and schizoaffective disorders when he was a teen, and had been living with his grandparents after receiving treatment from different mental health facilities.
He would come up and down this little path right here, breaking bottles. He would get rocks and just break them. And I wasn't going to tell him anything because I already knew that he had problems.
Some friends reported that the Gremlers were afraid of their grandson, but didn't want to turn him away.
They try to do everything for him. You know, they say sometimes grandparents' love can accomplish a lot, but not with him.
So you didn't see it as them trying to help you, you saw it as them...
No, it wasn't helpful at all. It was destructive to me.
Detectives pressed Christopher Lambeth on why he did this. He never provided an exact reason, but did tell detectives he stopped taking his medicine before he killed them.
Do you think you did this because you were off your medication?
No.
In 2007, Christopher Lambeth pleaded guilty except insane to the double murder of his grandparents. As part of that plea, he was sentenced 25 to life at the Arizona State Hospital.
We felt that he got a fair sentence because he had mental problems. They put him in a place where he was going to get help. That's where he should have been.
But after just 9 years, he'd be back living in the community.
He should have never been released.
When Lambeth was sentenced to the state hospital, he was put under the watch of the state's Psychiatric Security Review Board, or PSRB. This state board is responsible for keeping track of people deemed guilty except insane and deciding if those people are well enough to get out of the state hospital before their sentence is up.
Certainly, every time anyone makes a decision and can't predict the future, you can question, did I make the right decision?
Dr. Carol Olson is currently the head of the psychiatry department at Valleywise Health. She also used to be the chair of the PSRB.
I think that the board tends to be conservative and is supposed to keep community safety paramount.
So why release Christopher Lambeth early? Audio from a 2017 board meeting detailed his apparent progress.
His progress has just been phenomenal. He has complied with everything. He is doing things that normal healthy adults do. He's gotten a job on his own. He's got himself on a sports team. He cooks his own meals. He does his own laundry. I mean, he takes care of himself completely.
This voice is Christopher Lambeth's sister, who declined to talk with us in our reporting.
So I think at this point, it would be extremely beneficial for him to start gaining those other independent skills that he can start doing them on his own so he knows how to do them and so that he can survive as a functioning adult.
She wasn't the only one praising him.
Hypothetically, I could go to a baseball game or have lunch with him or something like that. So I'm very proud of his improvement.
His attorney also marveled at his progress, and the board ultimately approved Christopher Lambeth for less supervision, with a reminder that should have been taken seriously.
Second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Stay well. Take your medicine.
I will.
The exact date isn't clear, but by sometime in 2018, Christopher Lambeth was living at Tilda Manor. Even though he was living in the community, he still had to go before the board for check-ins. The last board check-in before he allegedly killed Stephen Howls was in August 2020.
Let's say the person ends up doing something before anybody is aware that they're deteriorating or not doing well. It sits poorly, obviously, because nobody wants to feel that they were responsible for releasing someone to the community who later does something to harm themselves or others.
Dr. Olson couldn't comment on Christopher Lambeth's case specifically. She resigned from the board several years before the group home killing.
I think it is important to know that Many times people are out in the community for years before something like that happens, and it is difficult to predict with 100% certainty how somebody is going to behave for years on end.
A 2018 state audit, before Stephen Howls died, found the board was making decisions with inconsistent data, a problem the board claimed it fixed. But critics aren't so sure.
Good work.
The PSRB declined to comment on Christopher Lambeth's case after he was arrested for killing again.
That's 3 lives already, or who knows how many more.
Imagine a rental house that's never been really taken care of. And you have loads of people living there that don't take care of anything. That's what the inside of this house looked like.
When Lisa Lomelli first walked inside this house she's describing, she couldn't believe her eyes.
Everything was worn, everything was old, stained, dirty.
Not a very good rating, especially for a place her son was calling home.
And plus, you know, you've got people with anger issues and there's holes and this and that. So you don't want to put a ton of money into it, but it was, you know, just the bare bones.
Lisa's son was living at the Tilda Manor group home on Wild Horse Drive in Gilbert. Lisa said he was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and bipolar disorder, and he was court-ordered to live at the home after he tried to hurt his family.
He hated it. I hated it.
But her son did make a friend on the inside.
When I would go visit, I always visited Chris and my son.
Chris, as in Christopher Lambeth.
I spent a lot of time with him, and never in my wildest dreams would I would never cross my mind he'd be the last person that I would have thought would have done something like that.
Were you aware of his background at all?
No. And that is something that bothers me a lot.
Lisa and her son had no idea Christopher Lambeth was a convicted double murderer after brutally killing his grandparents more than a decade before.
I wish somebody had given me the option to choose whether introduce this person, you know, into my life, to my kids and whatnot.
She'd often visit with her son and Chris, bring them around her other kids.
I needed to know, look, this person has a history of violent behavior. They didn't have to tell me what it was. They didn't have to, you know, but then I could have made the choice myself.
Lisa wasn't the only one taken by surprise. None of the neighbors we talked to knew a convicted murderer lived down the street.
And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I mean, you know, we have kids all up and down this street.
Neighbor Chris Lineberry is a dad and school administrator who instantly started voicing his concerns after Stephen Howls was killed.
I think about people who are more vulnerable, and obviously some of the other individuals who live in this home are vulnerable, and what was in place to keep them safe. You know, my issue is not with the residents, it's with the way that this home was run. And the fact that this happened and nobody in the neighborhood knew that there was somebody with that kind of record living there.
He took his concerns all the way to Gilbert's town council.
I have children in my neighborhood who are afraid to go to sleep at night now.
But it turns out there wasn't much the town could do, as it's a state-licensed facility.
We do not license the group homes, so it's very difficult for me to say that I can pull somebody's license when it's not in my control.
Gilbert Mayor Bridget Peterson was one of the first to call for the home to be shut down.
I would like to see this home closed down. I think that when you have an issue to this extent in a recovery residence like this, that there should be no question that it should shut down.
Especially knowing it takes a toll on the town's resources.
We have over 80 group homes in Gilbert, and so my police department unfortunately comes to know some of them very well. This happens to be one of the ones that is in our top 10 of visits from our police department.
Tilda Manor had 5 locations, 3 in Gilbert and 2 in nearby Mesa. According to Gilbert police records, the Tilda Manor on Wild Horse Drive had 91 police calls from the beginning of 2017 to September 2021, putting it at number 8 in the top 10. Another Tilda Manor location in Gilbert ranked even higher, with 110 calls over the 4-year period.
Anytime the PD is spending time at a home like this or recovery residence, they're not able to be out on the streets for other things that are going on in our community. And it's just an unfortunate situation that we have bad actors in some of these businesses.
Here in Mesa, it's a similar story. Over the past 2.5 years, officers were called to the 2 Tilda Manor group homes a combined 176 times. Some of those calls were dismissed, but others turned into investigations. The majority of calls are missing persons cases. Others show cases of violence. One resident arrested for attacking another, and another case where a resident punched a staff member in the face. Once, a resident was rushed to the hospital after trying to kill himself with a razor given to him by a staff member.
It doesn't seem like a very safe environment. It's unacceptable. And the purpose, my understanding of the purpose of homes like this is to help people make different and better decisions.
Back in Gilbert, police records show there were 2 calls for assault at the Wild Horse Drive home less than a month before Stephen Howls was killed. Neither involved Christopher Lambeth, who, by all accounts, was a model resident at Tilda Manor.
I want to go see him and say, hey, Chris, what happened? I mean, he calls me Mom. How did they let this happen? Is what I want to know. I want to know, how did they let this happen?
No one at Tilda Manor would talk with 12 News after Stephen Howls died, but we did learn that staff members are not allowed to touch residents, and if a situation got out of control, protocol was to call 911.
And then you don't have any skills in breaking up fights or talking somebody through a mental breakdown or somebody that's having a seizure, and all you can do is dial 911, your job's going to be so incredibly hard.
Not to mention, they're supposed to be providing supervision to residents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when you look at case after case involving missing residents, fights, attempts at self-harm, something doesn't add up.
That's a sign that there's something bigger happening there. And the residents who live there, obviously, many of them have issues, but they need help with those issues. You know, I understand nobody's perfect. I certainly am not. To have a place that's charged with the responsibility they are and have the lack of oversight that they apparently have is extremely disturbing. It's something I'd really like to see change.
A state investigation later found that those 2 employees working the morning of the killing did break a very big rule. And that wasn't the only problem going on inside that house. After calls, emails, and messages all went unanswered, we tracked down the owners of the group home Tilda Manor.
We're with Channel 12. We were hoping to ask you about Tilda Manor.
Samuel and Grace Ashu. Arizona business records list them as the ones in charge of all 5 Tilda Manor locations.
Would you speak to us, though, about the recent situation there on Monday?
Right now, I can't talk to our corporate lawyers.
We haven't gotten any information. We've left a few messages with you guys, but you haven't responded.
This was 3 days after that group home murder on April 12th, 2021.
Okay.
Sorry, no ma'am. Well,
Tilda Manor did, however, have to answer to the state health department, who went to investigate the day of the killing. And what they found would be a bombshell. 23 violations in all, from little things to glaring problems. At least 6 of the 9 residents living in the home, including Christopher Lambeth, were flagged to be a danger to self or danger to others, which should have been considered before they were placed at Tilda Manor. 7 out of 9 residents weren't screened properly and shouldn't have been admitted to the home.
It did result in a danger to our neighborhood. It resulted in a danger to the employees, and it obviously resulted in a danger to the residents because one of them was murdered, allegedly by another one of the residents there. And when you read that report, it's just damning.
There's more. The state found some of the residents weren't receiving proper counseling, including Lambeth, whose treatment plan wasn't even up to date. In the months leading up to the murder, Lambeth's behavior started to change. He expressed concerns about moving out, amid pressure from his treatment team. He skipped meals, stopped talking to other people in the home. Notes in Lambeth's file showed he would sometimes have hallucinations linked to dangerous commands and homicidal behavior, that he had signs of anxiety and depression, but there weren't any interventions, that he had a decrease in therapy sessions, before allegedly killing Stephen Howls, that his medical records show one of his medications ran out and seemingly wasn't replenished for about a month.
I think you can judge a society a lot based on how we take care of people who aren't able to take care of themselves or who need extra assistance. To allow them to stay in business and allow them to continue to be neglectful and derelict in their duty, as the report says, is really a travesty.
The state found the 2 employees working the morning of Stephen Howls' death violated group home policy when they left a reportedly dangerous Christopher Lambeth inside the house, unsupervised, with 8 other residents. And after a review of Tilda Manor's rulebook, the state found some of the group home's own rules had been out of compliance with the state since 2013, despite several inspections since then. How might it be possible for a violation to be missed during an inspection?
That's a great question.
This is Colby Bauer with Arizona's Department of Health Services.
If it's an annual inspection, our inspectors are going in there and they're looking generally at things. And so they may not see some violation with paperwork, for example. And so we may miss that one staff member doesn't have all the training they're supposed to have. That can't happen. So those inspections are really just a spot check.
Colby used to oversee licensing for the state health department, including group homes, but left his role in early 2022 after we shot this interview. He couldn't talk specifics about the murder case at Tilda Manor, but could weigh in generally about licensing. State surveyors are supposed to go out and inspect homes once a year, but that might not always happen, like if a facility is accredited. The only other time the state would show up to inspect a group home could be if there was a complaint. Do you think the state should be doing more or could be doing more to ensure these facilities are safe?
We're out there every year. We're out there for every complaint. There is a limit to how often we can go out. We have to have reason under Arizona law to go into these facilities. And so the way that we do our inspections is all rooted in Arizona law.
Who do you think is responsible for ensuring people are safe in these homes?
Well, I mean, by Arizona law, it's the folks that actually run the homes. And, you know, ultimately the licensees are responsible.
I think that group homes have a place in our community, and I think it comes down to them being operated well. And again, we have many in Gilbert that we don't have any issues with.
In the wake of the murder investigation, Gilbert Mayor Bridget Peterson changed their town policy, so police will have to report all calls to group homes to the health department, which, as of now, is not required by the state. Where do you think things went wrong?
I think from the state level down, if there was a way to notify the Gilbert Police Department, but even if our police department knew, how would they have prevented this? It really comes down to the staff working in that home. Maybe that staff needs to be better educated, maybe they need to be better trained, maybe they need to be more staff in a home, but I think that there's probably something that should have been done along the way.
Lisa's son moved out of Tilda Manor before Stephen Howls was killed.
If you could go back in time and you had, any say in this decision, would you let your son live in that house?
No, absolutely not.
From Lisa's view, this home was set up to fail.
Why speak out?
Because I don't want this to happen to anybody else. That could have, I don't want to say easily been my son, but I know my son and I know his issues and I know his triggers and whatnot. And my son could have very easily had an issue like that. And I don't want anybody else having to go through this, whether it's they flip out and do something terrible or whether something terrible gets done to them.
There are not a lot of places people with serious mental illnesses can go for help in Arizona. The state hospital and psychiatric units at other hospitals have a limited number of beds. Arizona's Medicaid program reported around 2,400 available psychiatric beds, which is up from years past. But the need rose too, and not everyone got a bed. Some people wind up in prison or jail. others end up on the streets.
Arizona has a very small number of long-term type of psychiatric hospital beds. So many of those people just end up getting continuously on a round of going in the hospital, getting out, often sent to a group home. They don't stay. Then they're off their medication, their symptoms get worse, then they get arrested for doing something, then they're back in the hospital again, and it's a continuous cycle.
A continuous cycle.
Right now, the way psychiatric hospitals are incentivized, they're all paid the same. It doesn't matter how complex the patient is. So if you have a more complex patient, either because they're highly violent or self-injurious or they have complex medical problems, psychiatric hospitals are incentivized not to take those patients. And so those patients often are poorly served and don't spend the time in the hospital that they need.
By now we know how Christopher Lambeth got to Tilda Manor, but we don't really know how Stephen Howls got there.
Did Stephen always want to get help?
It took a while for him to realize he needed it initially. But yeah, he wanted to get better. He wanted to have his life again.
Nicole and Stephen kept in touch for several years after they divorced, but Stephen eventually stopped responding.
So we were pretty sure he was either in Arizona or in Hawaii. But when you're in the hospital, when you're dealing with these things, you generally don't have Facebook, social media, phone number put in the phone book, ways to track people down like that.
We were able to piece some of his story together through court records, and it's a lot like that continuous cycle Dr. Olson mentioned. First, in 2015, he got a notice of eviction. In 2016, he got a ticket for trespassing in a Phoenix park. It's not clear why he was there or what happened immediately after that. But more than 2 years later, in 2018, court records show he was in the state hospital. His medical report indicated he had limited insight and impaired reality. A hospital staff person reported Stephen Howls was not a behavioral problem, that most of his issues are related to psychosis and delusional thoughts, like believing government officials were tracking him. The filing emphasized over and over that Stephen Howls needed serious help, and an advocate requested the county assign him a guardian to help with health decisions. But in January 2019, Stephen Howls was released from the state hospital to a group home. He was reportedly stable and sticking to a medication plan, but still had delusions. A few months later, the court denied his advocate's request for a guardian. Then, the paper trail goes cold again until November 2020.
Okay. State your name, please. Sir?
My name's Stephen Scott Howls now.
When Stephen Howls appeared before a judge for that 2016 trespassing ticket.
Ma'am, I don't have any memory of this happening, and I have found no evidence that I have signed it myself. There is no address that has been submitted to me of the location of this incident, so I find I must move that this be dismissed as a clerical error.
The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office said deputies responded to a call for service at a group home in Santan Valley and took Stephen Howls into custody when they realized he had an outstanding warrant for that trespassing ticket. A group home Howls told the judge he moved into just 3 days before.
They don't have business cards, and I didn't have it in my wallet. I'm sorry, ma'am. I was not prepared to be arrested. I was a plaintiff calling on the services of the police in Santan.
Okay.
And the sheriff's department arrested me. And there was nothing done about the defendants. Plural. Who were threatening me to the point of physical provocation.
Soon after all of this, the trespassing case was dismissed. This was 5 months before he was killed at Tilda Manor. As for when he moved there, a Tilda Manor staff member told police he'd been there about 4 months.
There needs to be systematic change, but I also think the more awareness there is, the more it's not just quiet and shunted to the side and people don't want to talk about it, the more we'll continue to see things happen.
Almost 3 months after the group home killing at Tilda Manor, Governor Doug Ducey signed a new law getting rid of the Psychiatric Security Review Board. Instead, all the guilty except insane cases will be managed by the state's court systems, meaning judges will decide whether or not someone should be released early. Certain lawmakers and advocates applauded the move, but Dr. Olson has her doubts.
And I wasn't sure that a judge in a busy criminal court would be able to take the time and have the background in mental health, as many of the board members do, to really make a considered decision about what should happen with that patient. I still feel I wish the PSRB would have received sufficient resources to be able to actually function as it was intended to function.
The change to courts isn't set to happen until July 2023. In the interim, the board is supposed to operate with newer, stricter guidelines. The new law did away with one position, so now there's only 4 people on the board. And in early 2022, we learned 2 more board members resigned. In February, March, and April of 2022, the board couldn't hold its monthly meeting because it didn't have enough people, meaning all people deemed guilty except insane who are due for check-ins are waiting in limbo until the governor's office appoints new members. And Dr. Olson brings up a good point. Only time will tell whether this change to the courts will make the state's mental health care system any better.
I personally feel that mentally ill people who committed a violent crime and were found guilty except insane need to have an enhanced type of monitoring beyond what occurs to those who have not, for the safety of the community.
In July 2021, the State Health Department filed to revoke Tilda Manor's license at the Wild Horse Drive location, much to neighbors' relief.
It would be a victory for my family, it would be a victory for our neighborhood, and it would be a victory for the people who live in that home.
The health department told me that despite the investigation and the murder, Tilda Manor was still allowed to operate all 5 of its locations.
The wheels of justice turn at glacial speed, and this definitely didn't happen quickly.
Tilda Manor disputed the revocation and still hasn't resolved this matter with the state. So the company still has its license to operate the home on Wild Horse Drive. Another Tilda Manor in Mesa actually lost its license in October 2021 after a complaint that residents were left alone inside. All 5 of the locations seem empty now.
How did it happen? How was an agency given the freedom to house people who they weren't qualified to house? How was there that big of a gap or hole in the system that people were able to fall through? And these aren't cracks. These are wide gaps.
The state was able to find so many problems only after Stephen Howls was killed at Tilda Manor. Tilda Manor wouldn't tell us whether the 2 employees working that morning were ever reprimanded, or explain why they were operating without following some of the rules.
And my issue is not with the individuals who live in that home. How in the world, putting people in a place where they're not, where there's nobody that's trained to deal with them, are you doing no harm?
As of now, Christopher Lambeth is the only one charged in this case. Christopher Lambeth, who was living in a state-licensed group home, found to have flaws in its function. A group home where broken rules were seemingly allowed to slide for years, despite regular state inspections. Christopher Lambeth, who is under the jurisdiction of a state board, criticized for making decisions with inconsistent data. Christopher Lambeth, who years ago killed his grandparents and was found guilty except insane, indicating he didn't know what he was doing was wrong.
I will say personally, I forgive and I have nothing against Christopher Lambeth. He is sick. I think this is the system that let both of them down.
In October 2021, Stephen Howls' family, not including Nicole, filed a lawsuit against Tilda Manor and the state of Arizona, blaming the group home, the state health department, and the PSRB for Stephen Howls' death and failing to properly care for suspect Christopher Lambeth. In court filings, Tilda Manor denied any wrongdoing and pointed the blame at Christopher Lambeth, the state health department, and other agencies involved. The state couldn't comment on pending litigation.
You know, we may have divorced, but he's still my family to me. He's still somebody that has a very important part of my heart.
Christopher Lambeth is scheduled to go to trial on the murder charge for killing Stephen Howls later this spring. He pleaded not guilty in that case. He also picked up another charge while in custody: aggravated assault for allegedly attacking another inmate, breaking his nose, and causing trauma to the other inmate's face. The same kind of violence that allegedly killed Stephen Howls at Tilda Manor, the group home that was only supposed to help both of them.
Given his condition, we knew that he would never be okay and back to normal functioning. But there are so many people who fall through the cracks with mental health that our main thing was wanting to make sure that He wasn't falling through those cracks. He was getting the help he needed. He was someplace safe, which unfortunately he wasn't.
After all these years, Nicole held on to the cards and letters from Stephen, his words sharing love and humor preserved with care as he fell through the cracks.
Since this report came out, a lot's changed. We received records from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office from that jail attack, which was caught on camera, showing Christopher Lambeth and another inmate.
And then all of a sudden, he attacked you by punching you with closed fists in the face.
In the face.
The state's Psychiatric Security Review Board officially shut down in January 2023, and all guilty except insane cases are being monitored by courts in Arizona. All 5 Tilda Manor group home locations are no longer operating. 2 homes, including the home where the murder occurred, had their licenses revoked by the state. The licenses at the other 3 homes expired and were never renewed by the owners. The owners of Tilda Manor settled with victim Stephen Howls' family out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the lawsuit is still pending against the state of Arizona and other service providers. And in December 2024, nearly 4 years after the killing, I was in the courtroom as Christopher Lambeth faced a judge for his fate.
After years of fighting in court,
0 State versus Lambeth, on for sentencing.
Christopher Lambeth is going to prison.
The offense was committed in a heinous, cruel, and depraved manner, Your Honor.
He took a plea deal for 2 charges: second-degree murder in the group home death and aggravated assault in the jail attack. Throughout court proceedings, Lambeth expressed interest in trying to pursue a guilty except insane defense or plea, which meant he could have been sentenced again to the Arizona State Hospital. But ultimately, Lambeth agreed to 20 years in prison under the plea deal.
This is a tragic case.
His defense making sure the judge notes Lambeth's history of serious mental illness before giving her order.
You shall be sentenced to a period of 20 calendar years.
When Lambeth was asked to speak, he spoke for less than a minute, sharing some words that didn't seem to be related to the case.
All the way through, one way through.
Records show a relative of Stephen Howls wrote to the court, saying in part that the system they relied on to help Stephen ultimately failed him, and that it became a major contributor to the destruction of not only Stephen's life, but Christopher Lambeth's too. The relative closes by saying in part, "We pray the defendant gets the care he needs."
Prison records show that Christopher Lambeth was taken to a prison in Buckeye, where he's seemingly being held in a mental health unit. His release date is 2041. We stayed on top of this reporting because we wanted to highlight gaps in Arizona's mental health care system and the criminal justice system, some of these gaps that still need to be fixed. So thanks for watching. For the I-Team, I'm Erica Stapleton.